Welcome to the Linen Suit and Plastic Tie podcast. This is the podcast where we work to dissect and analyze the amazing, the stupendous, the epic, the cool, the cunning, the spectacular power of storytelling and learn how to harness that power in our everyday lives. I'm Gaurav.
I'm Kevin. Gaurav just loves spitting on his mic today.
Enunciate. You told me to enunciate more. I am enunciating. I've been thinking about this concept of, because I'm trying to read a lot more, but I've been thinking about this concept that actually Ryan Holiday was talking about on a podcast. He essentially said that you do not get credit for reading hard or bad stories, right? He was talking about how in Stoicism there's a story about a student who read this very obscure, very intense, very hard offer, and he went to class and was kind of just bragging, I finished his whole arc, I finished his whole story. And the teacher comes up to him and says, if that author was a better storyteller, you wouldn't have anything to brag about. And that I find so fascinating, because we spend so much time trying to read things or force ourselves or trying to do things we think will make us seem smarter, will make us enjoy it more. You don't get credit for sitting through that artsy film or reading that really intense book that you hate. When a story doesn't connect with you, that means the storyteller didn't do a good enough job or wasn't focused on connecting with you. What do you think about this concept? Like, for example, something I have struggled with is giving up on things. Like, I definitely have trouble giving up on books. I forget who said, but this is the idea that the most prolific readers give up on the most books. For me, I have a bunch of unread books in my apartment, but I don't think I've ever started a book that I haven't finished. And I fight through them. But yeah, I've read bad books. But it is a really interesting concept. Like, Kev, what do you think about that? This idea that the most prolific readers give up on bad books because you do not get credit for reading a tough book.
I feel there's also an angle to this that's for prolific readers. Over time, you grow to kind of have a taste or be able to discern if a book is going to be what you like or is going to be a story that is valuable pretty early on. So it makes sense that, for those types of readers, they'll be able to filter through books more easily. I think for more rudimentary readers like us, you're gonna have to go through a few of those books to be able to tell, what a not so great story looked like, so that you'll be able to get to that point later on as you read more books.
I agree to an extent. I think we consume stories in everything, right? Through television, movies, that we know our taste maybe better than we think. And also, I never want to shut off from exploring new stories. Like, there's been amazing books that I would never have thought about reading, right? For example, Kivana Ramasetti, she wrote Davashashi's Last Day and Advocate and the Hollywood Wives. That is not in our demographic at all, right? You even less so than me, because at least I have the Indian thing, right? But these are books that we explored, we tried, and we fell in love with, right? So it's a toss-up for sure, because I do think I have some decision from what I like, and I do think I want to expand my mind. But yeah, I do think we should all try to give up on things we're not liking faster than we do. We don't get credit for seeing something through if it's not going to serve us. We should be quitting stories early if we're not liking it. So I think it goes down to a lesson I've talked about before that I've tried to harp in, is that don't hate on genres or types because you've had bad experiences or because other people said things. Find something you connect with. If you do, double down. If you don't be afraid of cutting it. Anyways, speaking of exploring stories that we are unfamiliar with, exploring new worlds, we are talking to an amazing podcaster today. And no, as much as that intro sounded like it, it's not us. Kev, who are we talking to today?
Today we are talking to Mark Chavez. He is a comedian. He is co-host of CBC's let's make a sci-fi or let's make a rom-com podcast, it really echoes what we do here on this show in a way, because every season, Mark and his co-hosts explore a different genre of stories. Season 1 is sci-fi, season 2 is rom-com, and their whole season is themselves trying to write stories of those genres as comedians. So it records their creative process, the people they interview who are experts in their own genre, who give them advice, and also breaking down the structures of these stories along the way. So it's such a cool concept, very well executed, and we are so excited to be able to talk to Mark, to pull behind the curtains of what they're doing. So let's get into that. Mark, to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What is your story?
Yeah. My name is Mark. I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in the late 70s. I grew up there. I love that city. It's kind of a strange place to grow up. It's it's not very. It's kind of poor, so it's like, but it's beautiful. It'll always be my home. I live in Vancouver now, Vancouver, British Columbia. I went to school in Albuquerque. I thought I was going to be a scientist. I wanted to study math. I wanted to be an astrophysicist. And when I got to university, the University of New Mexico, I was always taking theater, and I was doing comedy. And I just felt that pull. And plus, I wasn't great at math anymore. I was good at math in high school. I was good at math all through school. And then something switched, and I remember I was in a physics 2 class, and like everyone around me was just like doing the extra credit, and I was like treading water. So I felt it was time to switch. I was really enjoying what I was doing. I was writing a lot, and then performing. And then I met my longtime comedy partner in high school, and he and I started touring a double act comedy show. And we went to the Canadian Fringe Festival circuit, was our first big tour, which is a system of theater festivals that starts on the East Coast and goes all the way to the West Coast. And you can just ride, as we did, a Winnebago through the country and perform and make a modest, tiny living doing it. It was the first time I'd ever made money doing comedy. I didn't have to work my day job doing it. And I vowed after doing that tour that I wouldn't work a day job anymore if I could help it, because I wanted to make a living doing what I was doing. So we toured. We were called the Pajama Men. We did that for years. We went to Edinburgh, ended up performing in the West End in London. We toured the world for quite a while. And then right before COVID happened, about a year before, we decided to take a little hiatus, and that hiatus is stretched on until now. And I had settled down. I got married, and I settled down here in Vancouver, and had a kid named Cosmo, and, who was the light of my life. And I work here in an improv group, and I do a podcast, which is how you came to know me. I still work in comedy and acting and writing. And that's kind of the nutshell of what I do.
So you agree Canada's better than America now, right?
I won't pick sides. I love both so
Ooh.
much. I love living here. I love living in Canada. It's such a great place. It's really great for me. But I love the United States. There's so much to love about it.
I mean, I'm doing the opposite, right? I'm from Toronto and I'm living in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
But I'm
Yeah.
I'm definitely. I mean, I'm not gonna legally pick sides here, though. But whatever.
You don't have to. There's not a rule.
Everyone who knows me knows I pick the side, but it's fine.
Canadian shirt and everything.
No, I'm not wearing. I'm wearing John Mulaney shirt. This is it's a quote from one of John Mulaney's specials I love. That's do all my friends hate me, or do I just need to go to sleep? It's one of my favorite quotes on him. I have it written down. It's like, do all my friends hate me, or do I just need to go to sleep? Because I think I've been realizing recently, and so off track, thanks, Kev. But I think I've been realizing recently that if I'm like in a deep, dark internal spiral at night, I can just sleep.
Oh man. And like when you're in those spirals and you start writing stories of interactions you're having with people, that you could have with people, and like you create this avatar of them and they're mean for some reason. And it's like,
Yeah.
why am I doing it? Why have I done this whole interaction with somebody who's a perfectly nice person who I just think is going to be mean for some reason? It's very weird when you're in a dark place like that.
No, I mean, honestly, it's something we talk about on the show a lot because that's internal storytelling,
Yeah.
right? That's a
Yeah.
story you've made up about a
Hmm.
person who there's no interaction. It's like getting mad at someone after you have a dream about them, right? It's
Yeah.
like that's a completely made up story, but the feelings are real, and you understand. Oh, you have more control over how you perceive the world than you think.
Absolutely, and that's something I really try to catch myself doing. It's not impossible. It's really hard to kind of get out of it. But yeah, I'll be like, and then, oh, just like fuming. Oh man, I'm so mad, or I feel so bad about myself, and then like just go, wait a minute, nothing's real. None of this is real.
I mean, on this point, it's one of the things I love about comedy. We haven't had a comedian on the show yet, so we're super excited to talk about it. Is that comedians
Well,
are
let's find
some.
out after this if you still haven't had a comedian. Let's
um,
see.
you've been paid to do comedy. That's really our bar.
Great, great. Then yes, then I'm a comedian.
But something that I love comedy. I've researched it as a storytelling method in one way. I read a book about business and storytelling called Humor Seriously by two Stanford MBAs. And it's talked about using humor in business. And something they talk about with comedians is that comedians are some of the most observant people in the world because y'all lot are always kind of pulling out kind of these things that not obvious things, but things you can find comedy in, things that you can point out that people are kind of just taking for granted, right? And it's a great way to educate and learn and kind of approach life with a little bit more humor. Can you touch upon that a little bit of your comedic process, how you write, how you kind of observe these things?
Yeah, I think with comedians, it's kind of a problem. It's like it's not chosen. You know, you recognize and notice things all the time. My mother used to say around me and my brothers, she'd be like, "Don't show any weakness because they'll pounce." And and what she meant by that is just like if there's any slight kind of like any quirk of behavior or any kind of like missaid thing or misplaced whatever, we would jump on it and like joke and make fun. And I think as a tool, I think the first kind of the unsharpened version of that is to kind of bully and make fun, if you're not careful, because you can notice differences in people or the way things happen, and then like, it's obviously not great, but and then as you kind of develop your personality and kind of see the world and learn more, the quirks become something that you can like love and just kind of witness. But they're everywhere, and which is why, and I'll just bring it to the show that you kind of heard me on, called Let's Make a Sci-Fi. The whole premise of that was, can comedians write a science fiction show that's earnest and not make fun of it? Because science fiction is one of the most make funnable genres out there. Like, they're so serious, they're saying things like Plygon disapter and like, with a straight face, and they're creating these like ridiculous worlds. Star Trek's a perfect example of people with just like different bumps on their face to make aliens. um but we were, especially Ryan and I, were big fans of sci-fi, so it was like, can we do this without like, and take ourselves seriously? Can comedians take themselves seriously? And I think they do, and I think we do as a people. But I kind of went all over the place. But when it comes to kind of how I write, or how I observe the world, it always does start with a little bit of a quirk or like a strange kind of interaction.
Yeah, no, I think that it's one of the my favorite parts and most important parts of the world of comedy is that idea of a lot of it is just kind of things about the world that are being noticed and kind of zoomed in on and talked about, and it's like the people who turn left instead of right, right? It's just kind of this idea of storytelling in the world where you approach it comedically and you learn something and you see something and realize, oh, that's something that's happening that maybe someone's not directly deciding to do, right? And it's
Hmm.
one of the most important parts of comedy is kind of just being able to look at the world a little bit more critically, but in a humoristic way, right?
Hmm.
And it's fascinating. But yeah, talking about the show a little bit. Let's make a sci-fi. Now let's make a rom-com. we love this show. I think we first found it on it was one of the New Yorker's 20 top podcasts of 2022. Um,
It was the
Congratulations, by the
top.
way.
It was the top 10 because we were number 10, so we barely made the list, but we made the list, so I was very excited. Yeah,
No, I mean,
Nice.
yeah.
yeah.
A friend of ours who's been on the show before was on the list as well. Avery Trufelman's show, Articles
Mm.
of Interest. Yeah, she was on our show in season one. And so we love talking to podcasters. What we love about your show is it fits so well in what we do here because it is kind of like a in-world example of learning how to tell stories, right? And learning what storytelling is and learning a genre that you've never really worked in before kind of from scratch and bringing in experts and touching upon it and building a whole script. Can you tell us about what's the creative process? Let's start with Let's Make a Sci-Fi. The goal was to write a pilot, and you had a certain amount of time. What's the creative process that goes into that, and how did having those deadlines help you actually write?
Yeah, so the process was different than I've ever worked on a television pilot or a film script or anything like that, of which I've written quite a few. Um, what we did, because we were recording it, was we would meet either it was during the height of COVID, so we were usually on Zoom. So we came up with a bunch of ideas, and we just pitched each other ideas. We recorded that, but we really did we really had 10 ideas each that we pitched and vetted and really got our reactions with, that were all just kind of world buildy science fiction plot ideas, and we picked one. But we quickly learned that, like any script, any story you're telling, that we were already off track, which was we didn't start with a character. We started with a world. We started with uh, an idea. It's like anything could have been set in what we had decided. So we basically didn't do anything at first. I mean, that's not true. We created a world, which is a major part of science fiction. But we immediately were told by a couple people, they were like, "You need a character. Like, you need to really focus in on that." So and this is a lesson that I feel like all the lessons I learned during the first season of Let's Make a Sci-Fi were many of which I had learned over and over and over again. And I feel like that happens with any kind of discipline. Like, you're kind of always honing in on the bullseye of perfection, but you can never quite get there. At least I can't. Um, so we took the idea we wanted, which was about two spaceships that were marooned in very, very, very far space, and we created a character that we liked, and then we talked about her, kind of filled her out, what are her wants and needs, and then we developed the other characters, all the side characters that she would be interacting with, the other supporting characters, and then we started scripting it, just writing scenes. And I, for the first season, kind of forgot we were doing a podcast. I would just get into the space, and I would be dead serious, and I'd be like, "Let's figure this out," and we would write. And every once in a while, I'd be like, "Oh, I should probably be a little bit more entertaining if we're doing the, it's supposed to be funny and fun." And we eventually, we were kind of we kept deadlines are great because you kind of just have to back away, and then there's your thing. And you always have, you have that crunch time run up to the deadline, which is I find helpful. And then we beat it out the story. We had our outline. We vetted it with every time we would have an interview, we would tell them our premise, and the premise was all the kind of the elevator pitch was always getting more and more developed between every interview. And the problem with recording kind of out of sync is we would be writing, we'd be 3 months into the writing process, but then we would have an interview that seemed like maybe we were just weeks into it. So we'd kind of have to back up and kind of say, "What do you think about this?" And sometimes we would be knocked back 3 weeks into that, and be like, "Well, we got to start over." And then we wrote the script, and it was basically a first draft, and then we recorded it. We got a bunch of actors, and we put them in a room, and we did a radio play of this pilot episode. The our producers really did a great sound design. It sounds wonderful, but I just cringe. I'm like, "Oh, we couldn't even do a second draft of this thing because of the deadline," So it definitely did have its issues, like, working under the stopwatch like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was such an interesting way to write. I don't know if anyone's written that way. Free comedians, COVID, documenting the whole process through a podcast, coming out with a kind of radio play script. And well, we loved it. I loved Progeny, which is the name of the show from the first season of your show. So meta, but no, I loved
Yeah.
Progeny. I loved this idea, and I think what I loved about this show is that exactly what you were talking about just now is that the example you used of starting with a setting and realizing from talking, oh, we should have started with a character, going back, rewriting, reworking, is that it was a documented learning curve, right? It was
Hmm.
being very open, being vocal of these are the lessons we go through, which is a lessons a lot of screenwriters go through. It's just never
Hmm.
documented, right? We only see Succession at the end, right? You don't
Yeah.
see the work that goes into it. And so I loved that. I loved hearing kind of these really abject storytelling lessons. And I think one key example was that because Kevin and I do this, right? We talk about storytelling day in and day out. We've been doing this for years. One of the things that we've learned a lot is about authenticity and about not limiting any part of yourself in any storytelling endeavor. So I remember in the beginning of your season one, when you guys were just so hardcore not doing comedy, being like, no, I was like raging against you while I was listening. I'm
Mm.
like, because you were so hardcore about that. Like, it has to
Mhm.
be earnest. We can't be any comedic at all. It can't be funny. And then near the end of the season, which I'm sure is all async, so whenever it was in your writing process, you're like, well, it could be a little bit funny, right? There's things that could be comedic. We could let that go a little bit. And it opened, I feel like it released you in such an interesting way. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Where you're like, okay, let's let us do our sci fi instead of let's make a sci fi.
Yeah, well, I was so holding on to the premise of the show because I thought that was what the success of it would rely on, and that was what was pitched. It's like, let's make these funny people, not be funny, which is not a great idea. It's like, let's see, I mean, they may as well have had me like dig a well, something I'm also not good at. Like, what's the point? But it really got us into a headspace of like of just getting into a different genre. What I remember when we interviewed Neil Blomkamp, who was the writer director of District 9 and vast other catalog of cool movies. He gave us this like singular advice. He was like, what you should do is write a comedy science fiction pilot. Lean into your strengths. And we were like, yeah, probably right. We probably should. And he was the only one to say that. Like, he was the only one who was like, you really should just do what you're good at and make it great. Uh, and then as we got further into the process, um, Maddie had written a scene that was like very funny, and then we kind of got in a discussion about like how we could use it. And I think I was just like, well, I think we can put comedy in. The characters can be funny, but we can't break the world. Like, as soon as like a joke happens that like kind of undermines the rest of what's going on, we can't do that. So the comedy would have to come from like characters, and people are funny naturally. Like, everybody has funny people they work with. So we just kind of allowed that. And then even situations like we find ourselves as people in ridiculous situations. That's a thing that
Mhm.
happens. And I don't care if you're on a spaceship or not, like, it's going to happen. So I we just kind of let that loose. And now as we develop Progeny, which is the show that like, as you said, the pilot of the show, we are continuing to work on that and try to get that funded and turn it into something. We're allowing it, we're rewriting it, and we're allowing comedy to be part of it, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah, definitely both seasons have been awesome. And now that you have created two different types of stories in two different genres, have you noticed that, knowing these formulas for sci-fi or formulas for rom-com affect how it probably has affected how you view these genres, but how exactly has it killed your interest in these genres because now you've seen it all, you know what's going to happen, you know what goes where, or did it give you like a newfound respect in any way?
Yeah, I mean, with sci-fi, I'll start with that. I'm a huge sci-fi fan. and it just gave me more respect for the genre, and I just really really loved it, and I just love it more, which I expected. And then with the rom com, which I didn't expect, is I grew to really love rom coms. Like
Mm.
I find them really interesting now, which I didn't before. I kind of discounted them, not in a way where I thought they were bad or anything, 'cause I watched plenty, but I was like, what's to know? They're
Mm.
they're so formulaic. Um, but you try anything, and it's always really nice to talk to experts in any field. You don't care what it is. I love listening to people talk about something that they're passionate about, and or do good. And so we interviewed all these people. It was like so fascinating to hear, their takes. And yeah, so I've just grown to really respect rom-coms, especially when they work. It's like it was really hard. You found the one thing, the tiny
Mm.
thing, the nugget that wasn't done before. Even if it was done before, you found your own twist in it, and you made it work. And then I like crying when I watch movies, and if they make me cry, I'm like, great, it worked, done. Little bit of catharsis or whatever. Yeah.
Well, I think people give some of these genres so much just crap because they're like, oh, it's so formulaic. But I'm like, a lot of things are formulaic, right? You know they're gonna end up together. That's totally fine. It's about the arc between it, right? Between the beats that pulls people in, right? I
Hmm.
think one great example, well, two great examples is Seinfeld and Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Those are both very formulaic shows. Like if you hear them talk
Hmm.
about it, they're both supposed to be shows about nothing. And they're both, and what I mean by formulaic, before any of the fans come after me, is that the idea is that in the beginning of the show and the end of the show, they've learned nothing and nothing's changed. And the exception with
Hmm.
Always Sunny, maybe their life is worse. So I think a great example is the episode where the gang buys a boat. And I knew within 30 seconds, as soon as they said, but oh, so the boat's going to sink. You knew immediately. Like, you know this, but it's the
Hmm.
journey. And I think this is a great example of rom coms as well, is that you know they're going to end up together. So you're like, oh, it's so obvious they're going to end up together. Who cares? Like,
Yeah.
there's going to be an ending. It's about
Hmm.
how can they draw you in, how do they can make tension. And there are bad rom coms and there are good rom coms. And I think
Hmm.
that's one of the art of writing and storytelling is like, I don't care if you know how it's going to end. Are you going to enjoy this journey?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, so comedy is about, surprise and, tension and release and all of that kind of stuff, and like, breaking tension and defying expectation and all of that. But in that, you still are expecting it. You're still
Mm-hmm.
expecting to be surprised. Um, and, you know, people love rom-coms too because of the formula. It's, for lack of a better term, safe, and it's comfortable, and it's comforting to be able to sit and watch as their entertainment, to escape. So what's the
Mm.
problem with that? Of
Mhm.
knowing what you're getting into. They bring a lot of people a lot of happiness, so great.
A huge part of this show, besides just your creating process between the three of you, is that you have to also interview a lot of people who give you a lot of different advice, and very, very cool people that add perspectives into the same genre that you've been working on throughout the season. So, were there any like most like across all these different people, are there any common themes that you get?
Yeah, especially in Progeny, when we were writing the science fiction, because I think this is a pitfall with people who are new to like heavy genre writing, is that they forget that they have to write a story. And and so we kept getting that advice. It's like,
Mhm.
when you're writing a genre, you're still writing about people, or about character, not necessarily people, but you're writing about characters and what goes on with them and their arcs. And so we got a lot of that. Uh and we what I went in thinking that there would be, they'd be like, yes, your world is interesting, but what if the planets were blue? It's like they
Mhm.
I thought we would get kind of that type of like, here's how you write science fiction. But they were like, you got, that's fine, fine, do whatever you want in that, make whatever world you want. We got a little bit of like world building advice, just like, you need to, if you're making new rules, you have to stick with those rules, like that kind of stuff. But and then we got really great science advice, which was really fun. But
Mhm.
everyone came back to character.
It's just different lenses on character and journey, right? And
Hmm. Hmm.
that's what these genres are, right? That's we're trying to make connections, right, with humans and learn something about the world. And it's one of the
Hmm.
big things about storytelling that we love talking about on our show is that storytelling is about learning something about the world through a
Hmm.
lens you didn't expect, right? Like
Hmm.
it doesn't
Hmm.
matter how crazy the science fiction is. I think this is talked about in every single science fiction, where it doesn't matter how crazy are out there, if they're aliens, if they're futuristic, it doesn't matter. It's at the core about the relationships between these characters. They just have
Hmm.
different
Hmm.
tools, right? They just have
Yeah.
different toys. And science fiction has been such an important part of our history where you talk to so many amazing scientists and people who have changed the world, who've cured diseases, who's created new
Hmm.
technology, and so many of them are inspired by science fiction, right?
Hmm.
So, and I think this is something I love about this genre and I love about storytelling is that storytelling plays a very, very key role in inspiration. It plays a
Hmm.
very key role in um, the future of the world because this is what inspires people to go out and create something. This is where they realize, oh, I can do this. This is where we learn other perspectives, right? So
Hmm.
I think this is a kind of a tirade ode to this genre is that it's such an amazing place to inspire the next generation.
Yeah. And it definitely inspired me growing up. I mean, it's why I wanted to be an astrophysicist and didn't. I thought, why don't I just like skip the beat and just make my own things? Um, the One of the interesting things too, when talking with like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Phil Plait and a woman named Mika McKinnon, who they all worked in various capacities as um, advisors on science fiction shows, and like they would say like, well, you tell me what you want to happen in your story and
Mhm.
I can help you get there with science, as opposed to saying, is this okay? Can a ship do this? They'd be like,
Mhm.
well, no, but like, what are you trying to do? Like, what do you want? You want an asteroid to be lassoed by a spaceship? Well, I can tell you how that
Mhm.
works. And I really like that because they were going at the art in a way of like of saying like, no, that can't happen, and meeting the writers halfway, um, because no one, like, if you have any kind of inkling into science or anything, space, and you see something weird, you're as a even if you don't, like, you'll kind of be like, is that real? Like, can that really and that takes you out of the story. Um, but I really appreciated that type of advice where it felt like they were team players in that way.
It doesn't have to be perfect with the science. It just has to be close enough that you can believe it.
Yeah, it'd be plausible. And if you invent, some new thing, then that has to maintain, like in this world, this is what happens. In this world, that they can walk on
Mm.
the ship because they have a gravity button. It's like fine. Like fine. you know,
Mhm.
it's hard to make people anti-gravity when filming, especially TV.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think it's one of the things about sci-fi where, and honestly, all genres, it just got to be exciting enough and real enough that it's plausible. It doesn't have to be exactly. Then we wouldn't grow. Like we wouldn't have. It would be
Yeah.
boring, really, if it's exactly realistic to exactly what we know.
Yeah, I mean, there's like you can take a lot of stories and just and dissect them and be like, well, why did they do that? Like I watched a horror movie recently called Barbarian, which is uh, I thought was great, but there's a turn in it where it's like this is completely like if you really think of it, it's like this, and like aside from like the fact there's like no spoilers, but there's like
Mhm.
monstery things going on, like there's definitely like fictiony stuff going on. But because one of the characters does something that's like a bit not what the character would do, what we've been led to believe up until that point, I'm like, she wouldn't do that, you know. Um, but it didn't take me out of it because the container, they needed that to happen, and the story was
Yeah.
working
Hmm.
anyway.
Mhm.
So I only thought about it kind of later when I was like, well, that's not, oh well. Who cares?
Mhm.
Like, who cares?
Yeah, and we see that I think with the rom-com story that you crafted too. I remember like for I think episode 6 was it, the grand romantic gesture after the characters break up. The expert interview was like, that's like in real life, that should be it. Don't go back. Right. But
Right.
like for the sake of the story, because this is a rom-com, this has to be part of the arc. So the grand romantic gesture still has to happen. You still have to write it, even though in real life maybe you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's great. And by the way, I really loved, like, I know like the three of you had three different versions of that gesture, but I loved the one where Catalina just led all the kids to pirate dock the ship. I know it didn't get paid. It might have been out of
Yeah.
character for her, but it was amazing.
Kevin, do you think
Thank
the
you.
kids were driving the ship? Because and Mark, correct me, I'm pretty sure they were just on the ship and they docked. I don't think any of the kids were driving the ship.
Well, Catalina leaves the ship, so somebody is helming the. I mean, maybe it's her coworker. Maybe maybe her ex-boyfriend Mark is driving, but they're on the ship. They're manning the water cannons, and they they are risking their lives, jumping from a pirate ship to a yacht to attack.
Okay, well, I'm gonna say then, based on that answer, that it's canon that there's a kid driving the ship. That one of the kids is driving the ship.
Yeah.
She's the only adult.
But that's perfect. Like, just, cut to the kid, like, with the big wheel, like, I don't know what I'm doing, but it's fun. Like, that's great.
So I know you teased at the end of the season 2, maybe a potential season 3, and I'm sure you can't answer. And this would be your chance to kind of be the showrunner, be the narrator, right? Anything you can tell us, a genre you would like to do, how the experience would be different for you being kind of the helm of it?
We talked a lot. Like, we're leaning, pretty heavily on doing horror, the horror genre. But we talked a lot. We even like batted around getting out of making a film or TV and making like something else entirely. Like, let's make a board game, or like,
let's make a graphic novel.
Yeah, why not? Like, and so there's nothing set in stone. But I probably horror. I have a lot to say about that genre. I did a lot of horror movies when I was young, in Albuquerque. A lot of my friends were shooting, with their credit cards, these like really cheap horror movies. It's a genre that can be done very cheaply, so they're really popular to make for like new filmmakers. Genre in general is because you don't necessarily need a star. You can have, the star is like the gore or whatever the conceit is of the horror. We talked a lot about it. Not too wild about doing a slasher kind of thing. Didn't really interest any of us, but there's horror. So it really is very big. It encompasses a lot: psychological, Black Mirror style horror, futuristic, just horror comedy, and the relationship between comedy and horror, I think, is very plain. It's like tension release, expectation, like it, all of that kind of stuff plays in. So probably that, but don't hold me to it. Okay. Might change my mind. Yeah.
To close out every one of our episodes, we have this segment called Suspenders. It works like this. We ask you a fun, random question that's not related to anything whatsoever. You can give us any answer you feel like.
Great.
Question of the day is, if you could have any food delivered to your door right now, what would it be?
Green chili enchiladas. I've come from New Mexico, where the question on every restaurant is red or green, which means red or green chili. It relates to a chili plant that's grown in Hatch, New Mexico, and other places. That when it's riper, it turns red, and I think when it's less ripe, it's green. Green chili is like the food of New Mexico. It's created into a sauce that is specific to that region of the world, and I love that food so much, and you can't get it anywhere else in the quality that you can get it in New Mexico. So that's my answer.
I love it. I love how detailed that was. Really, I love it. No, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time. This was great. We're huge fans of your show. We're really excited to see where it goes. We're really excited to see where these projects go. It was such a great learning exercise for us too. I mean, it's a great way to learn more about storytelling and learn more about the process. So we love what you're doing. We love the CBC. We're excited to see what comes out.
Thank you so much. And likewise, I'm really happy to have met you, and I can't wait to hear more of your shows. It's been great.
Welcome back to Top Hat. This is the part of the episode where we dissect and analyze some of the cool learnings we got from this week's expert storyteller and learn how to apply those learnings to our everyday lives. And this week, we had the amazing Mark Chavez, who's a host of one of our favorite podcasts, Let's Make It Sci-Fi / Let's Make It Rom-Com, out of the CBC. I'm a huge fan of the show. I'm a huge fan of CBC. And it was really, really cool to talk to him. Wasn't it, Kev?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I know you really, we both really love their podcast, really like what they're doing, which is, very similar to what we're doing, except that they take a more hands-on approach in actually creating the story and dissect the structure of those stories in the meantime. So let's get straight to it. I know you love this conversation, Gaurav, so what did you learn from it?
Yeah, what I love about their show is they talk to so many unique expert storytellers in their own way while creating a project. So very similar to us, but we're taking a more abstract educational look. And something he talked about was this idea of a formula. And often a lot of people rage against genres because, it's so formulaic. Like that's an insult to the genre, right? But, formulas are essential to storytelling. It's something we talk a lot about. When you explore different types of storytelling, whether it's the hero's journey, or it's a rom-com, or it's a sci-fi, a lot of these stories have essential formulas. Sitcoms had 3-act structures and were built to fit ad breaks. Formulas aren't necessarily the enemy. If something seems too obvious or boring or too formulaic, that has less to do with the formula. That has much more to do with the execution of the formula.
Yeah, I think it's similar to why people get excited about sports. Formulas to stories are kind of like rules to sports. In a basketball game, you know how the times are going to be divided, but you don't know how each play is going to be executed, who's going to score, who's not. And it's those executions that bears those uncertainties that get people excited. Very important insight there. And of course, one of the most common advice Mark has told us that they got while doing the show is that when building the story, it's important to ground it to your characters, right? You focus on the hero's journey because a lot of times what they're doing, especially with a genre like sci-fi, is you get excited, you try to build a world, which is good, but it's not a story, right? To build a story, it's much more effective to use your characters as an anchor and start from there. So that's something we discuss quite often with a lot of people, right? Is to build your hero's journey in any kind of story that you tell.
That's how you make authentic connections, right? We don't fall in love even with the most immense world building. We could respect world building. World building is essential, but in the end, it's the characters we fall in love with. It's the authentic connections. It's the parasocial relationships that we make with the characters that get us to buy into a story, that gets us excited about a story. So say, for example, you're doing a sales pitch. You can build out the world and the problem all you want. But the most important thing you can do is you can create the characters. You can create an emotional and authentic connection between the person and the character. And something we talked about in the show a lot this week is the importance of being authentic. And something that Mike and his co-writers were having problems with is, as comedians, they naturally want to make it funny, but they're like, no, we can't. It has to be earnest, no comedy. And it ended up hurting them because they were neglecting that part of themselves. When they said, hey, you know what? Let's write this the way we can. And we are good at comedy. Let's have some comedy in it because that's going to be the most authentic. So I think it's so important to tell the story the best way you can, because if you try to tell someone else's story, that person's going to do it better than you.
And this has been another great episode of the Linen Suit and Plastic Tie podcast. If you like our content, subscribe and follow wherever you listen. Leave us a comment and a review to let us know what you're thinking. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at LSPTPod. LinkedIn, Linen Suit and Plastic Tie.
You are the absolute best in the world at being you. The best thing you can do is leverage your journey and be the most authentic version of yourself you can be. We love you. You're doing amazing. We appreciate you. Have an amazing rest of your day. See you next time.